Okay, hello everyone and welcome to today's art chat with Doug Eisele, Conservation Restoration. Are you making the right choices? I want to thank everyone for joining us today. My name is Sarah Alspaugh. I am the Online Education Manager here in the Fine Art Department at F&W. And before we get started, I wanted to let everyone know that you have entered this as a guest in listen-only mode, and that just means that you're muted so we don't pick up noise from your end. However, you will be able to see the PowerPoint and hear Linda and Doug today. So if you have a question, please type it into the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel, and they'll be answering your questions at the end of today's chat. So welcome, Linda and Doug. I'm so excited to hear what you guys have to say today.
Thanks, Sarah and Linda. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah.
Can you guys see my screen okay?
We can, or I can.
All right, great.
Yep, I can too. So we'll get started. Just real quickly, Doug is owner of Eisele Gallery of Fine Art, who represents my art, which I'm very, very proud and pleased that he does that. He's also owner of Old World Restorations, and I've actually had some artwork, some old artwork restored by Doug's company, and all of Doug's employees down there are wonderful to work with, and they did an excellent job on the restoration. I guess I probably should have taken a picture of that and put it in there, Doug.
I agree.
Yeah, I kind of messed that one up. Yeah. So anyway, welcome to the show, Doug, and we're going to be talking about restoration and conservation. Also want to say quickly welcome to everybody out there who's going to be listening either live or on demand, and we're always glad that you stop by and take some time out of your day to listen to us. So Doug, welcome, and tell us a little bit about your businesses that I just mentioned, how you got started, and what came first, Old World Restorations or Eisele Fine Art?
Actually, Old World did. I founded Old World Restorations in 1978, which when I look back, it's amazing to see and think about how quickly 37 years can fly by.
Yes.
It just astounds me that it's been that long. Old World specializes in the restoration and conservation of paintings, frames, decorative objects, works on paper, and museum-quality conservation framing. We've been nationally recognized for our work that we do with private individuals and collectors, as well as for institutions and galleries and insurance companies throughout the country. Mm-hmm. I originally opened Old World in a small studio in Terrace Park in 1978 that we outgrew after about 10 years. Later moved the operation to a larger facility at Cincinnati's East End at the corner of Columbia Parkway and Stanley Avenue. Many may recognize that structure was originally a church that was turned into more of a contemporary style office building. In 1978, I bought the historic Ferris House on Dragon Way, just off of Wooster Pike in Fairfax, near Marymount. Mm-hmm. Most people around here are unaware that this building was that was built in 1807, was one of Cincinnati's oldest brick structures. At that time, most of the other buildings around it were log cabins. It's a building that took Joseph Ferris and his family 10 years to build. So I'm very proud to own that building, and it's a labor of love. The renovations and restorations seem to never end, and continues to go on just to maintain the building. But so after nearly about a year of extensive renovation and restoration to the building, I moved Old World into a portion of the building where it is today. And then in 2006. I acquired Archival Conservation Center that was located on Daly Road in Cincinnati's west side, and through that was able to add paper conservation to Old World's existing menu of services. Also that year, I purchased the Patricia Weiner Gallery that was located in Old Montgomery. Was one of Cincinnati's oldest well-established galleries, specializing in the exhibition and sale of 18th, 19th, and early 20th century paintings, mostly by noted American artists, and obviously with an emphasis on Cincinnati and regional art. Mm-hmm. The gallery's since been renamed the Eisele Gallery of Fine Art, and has been also moved here into the historic Ferris House in Fairfax as well. The gallery has grown significantly in the past 10 years. In addition to our extensive collection of museum quality and period paintings, we now represent nearly 50 nationally and internationally recognized artists. We were honored just this past year to host this year's Oil Painters of America Eastern Regional Exhibition. So it's a great synergy between Old World and the gallery and then the Archival Conservation Center to now finally have it all in one location and where one business sort of complements the other.
And you did some the gallery space, I believe, reading, and I may be wrong, so if I am, you can tell me, that you did some, I guess, renovating, of the gallery space for the Ohio Oil, or for the Oil Painters of America, the OPA show that you did, and that was back in, no? Okay.
We did. It was a long, for a long time that was on our list of things to do, was to try, we needed to expand the gallery within the building to accommodate some larger shows, which the OPA show really sort of motivated us to get that done. It put a timeline on it for us, which was great because we did it. So
there was a gorgeous show.
It was. We were really honored and very privileged to be asked to host it. It had never been in Ohio, and they selected us to host that show. So we felt that we really needed to accommodate it. Our inventory typically consists of about 12 to 1,500 paintings.
Wow.
So it requires a lot of storage space to be able to manage that, and we only exhibit maybe 150 to 200 pieces at one time. So we have to have places to go with all the rest of that inventory when it's not out on display in the main gallery. Okay. And then the OPA brought us like 110 more paintings on top of our existing inventory. So we had to make room to accommodate that.
Right. Well, let's jump into what our topic is going to be about today. It's basically we have actually a couple different titles that we've been using to promote the show. One has been What Every Collector and Artist Should Know, and the other one is Are You Making the Right Choices? So, but I want to start actually back a little bit and talk about restoration and conservation. What is conservation? We'll start with conservation first, and what's typically involved. And in front of the viewers, there will be pictures that Doug has sent us of work that he has had done on various pieces of art, types of art. And if you see something, Doug, at any time that you want to talk about, feel free to just jump in and say, hey, I want to talk about this photo that's in front of you, so that we can, really educate our listeners to what conservation and restoration is. So let's start with conservation. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, I guess first of all, there is much confusion about the terms conservation and restoration.
Yes.
In the art world, and in the art world, the terms are often interchangeable. And their precise definitions are somewhat vague, and both words are oftentimes used very generically. Added to this is the fact that in Europe the terms are often used differently. In Europe, a conservator is usually a curator or a preservation officer associated with some type of cultural institution. A restorer is more of a technician that applies their knowledge and experience and artistic abilities to the cleaning, stabilization, repair, and restoration of works of art or decorative objects. But for most of us here in the U.S., the term restoration means to return something to its original condition by means of either rebuilding it, repairing it, repainting, or refinishing it in some way. We're adding materials to what's left of the existing piece to visually restore any damage or deterioration that's occurred over time. Now, conservation, on the other hand, primarily involves the preservation of the object for the future. In other words, to prolong its life without adding any materials that would alter its current state. Conservation can also involve stabilization of art, preserving its integrity making sure that its true aesthetic is revealed without changing the artist's original intent, or losing valuable historical information, especially in the case of, for example, archaeological materials, where the crust or corrosion is often an indicator of its authenticity. So basically, to restore something is to return it to its original visual appearance and condition. To conserve it is to prolong its life. You don't necessarily need to restore something in order to conserve it. But then again, many conservation projects involve a mixture of treatment methods that would involve some restoration. So I guess in recent years, AIC, which is the American Institute for Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works, of which we belong, has sought to clarify the terms and make them clear, and make it clear, too, that there are ethical ways to restore art, and that there are also improper ways to conserve it. I guess in one way of thinking is that the absolute definition of these terms is sometimes less important than the dedication of the people that are doing, and the practitioners and people that are doing the work, and their ability to follow a set of rules and guidelines and standards that have been set forth, like with organizations like AIC or the IIC. It's very important that all of our work as professional restorers and conservators be reversible, and that we only incorporate non-destructive methods in our processes. We don't want to do any further damage or any further harm to the piece in the process of either conserving it and or restoring it.
Right. So the photo that's up now, where you can see the canvas behind the paint, so paint's like chipped off or it's somehow peeled off or something like that. That is a definite restoration. Right?
Yes. It also incorporates some conservation measures. Typically, when we have a painting, especially a painting on canvas, we will look at a number of factors with that painting. We'll look at the structure, the support system. We want to look at the canvas that it was painted on, the condition of that canvas. How far along, how far deteriorated is it? How strong is it? Will it be able to carry the weight and of the ground and paint layers for years to come? So with specifically to this issue that you see on this image, we would first stabilize the paint in that area. You can see, especially near the top, you can see where there is some continued flaking paint. We have to first go in and stabilize that so that it just doesn't continue to flake away. We want to save and stabilize, reattach any of the existing paint that remains. But then beyond that, we want to look at the support system. We want to look at the canvas and find out, does it need any structure added or any stabilization or consolidation to help strengthen it. So that's often done sometimes through consolidation or the addition of a lining material. And then after that, then we clean off any residual consolidant that's used to stabilize the paint and or the structure, the canvas. And then losses like this can be infilled and in-painted or retouched, and then varnished to match the surrounding area. It's also very important that we try not to invade the undamaged portions of a work. We try and keep all of our work very, very localized, very close. As you can see in this image, there's just such a small portion of what was left of the eye, which would have been the sitter's right eye. And if we're not careful, we could lose that little piece there, a piece of paint that is really critical for recreating what was there properly.
Can you tell how this was damaged? You look just to the right. I'm sorry, I always get my right and my left backwards. The left part, as we're looking at it, there's clearly, what do you call it, water damage? I don't know. There's some kind of stain or something
That actually is from the wiping back the residual, some of the residual consolidant where they started to work on it. So I think that has more to do with the beginning of the treatment as opposed to the damage.
Okay.
My guess is this: you can see what appears to be a horizontal tear in the canvas that's been mended right in the center of that loss. So I think that work has been done in this case, and now they're working on the face. So this damage occurred as a result of a small puncture to the canvas or a small tear in the canvas.
Oh, okay.
Typically, you'll see this from gouges.
And when I'm just
And you also notice, if you look over to the far right of that image, you can see, and throughout the painting, you see a lot of cracking of the paint, and we refer to that as
that's what I was going to ask you about.
Yeah, oftentimes that's that craquelure typically as a result of as paint ages, especially oil paints, as they age and dry, they can separate and crack. You get a minute amount of shrinkage that can eventually cause this cracking. Now that can be caused by any number of things. It can be caused by drying. It can be caused by physical blows and stretching of the canvas. It can be affected by exposure to temperature, changes in humidity. All those things are factors in the way in which paints age. And here you see evidence of craquelure that obviously this paint needs to be stabilized or it will continue to just delaminate and eventually flake, and you have losses like you see here.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm probably going to have a lot of, and this is after you're done.
Aftershock, correct.
Yeah. So, anything you want to say about this particular slide before I go and ask another question?
No, not really. I think that shows, after all the things that I've just described are completed. So.
Right, looks beautiful. And
yeah, it turned out very nice.
Yes. Naturally, I'm an artist, so I'm going to ask probably some questions that only artists care about, but also, from a collector's point of view, I could see this asking as well. Is during a restoration, I was looking at all the crackling and the things that were going on in the painting, and I'd always been told that probably the way the paint and the canvas, any particular type of canvas, and we'll get into more around materials later, but there's always constantly a, kind of like an acid thing going on where the paint's eating the canvas or something. At least that's what I've been told. Is any of that true? Is the paint just so destructive that it just really will eat away at the canvas?
I think the issue is more the material, all the combination of materials themselves.
Okay.
When we talk about acidity, from a conservation standpoint, we look at the materials that were used to create a piece. For example, the stretchers, wooden stretchers that canvas are stretched to, they're wooden, they're acidic, they have acid in them. The canvas themselves can have acid in it. You oftentimes see early pieces with wooden backings. Where things are stored in very acidic environments. All those factors impact the aging of organic materials. Now I think it's more prevalent when we talk about works on paper, and you talk about the paper inherently. Many original papers have acid in them. And that needs to be treated and neutralized so that it doesn't continue to darken and discolor, tone, or damage and degrade the paper. Beyond that, though, it has to do with the environment in which those pieces are stored or housed or displayed. That obviously we've seen a big change in the way pieces are framed over the years. And now the standard is that everything be archival or acid lignin free, so that we're not introducing more acid or its effects into the artwork or around the artwork.
Right. So in this particular shot, it looks like there was a tear, or you're replacing an area of the canvas?
That was during an initial inspection. There was a large tear in this canvas. And they're obviously just looking to see what needs to be done to realign the canvas.
Okay.
And what we have there in the way of original fibers and everything to help line back up and fuse together.
Okay. So, just out of curiosity, do you stitch these things, or do they end up getting glued? I mean,
yeah, you really can't. We don't want to stitch it would be destructive. We would have to cause more damage in the process. So yeah, we do now rely on adhesives to help basically sort of, and I hate to use the word, but in a sense we're almost welding. We're infusing the area, consolidating and stabilizing the canvas so that it doesn't continue to fray, and basically impregnating the canvas fibers around the area of the tear with a consolidant or an adhesive to stabilize them, and then we basically realign the tear and join it back together with adhesives. Wow. And then if a secondary support system such as a lining or solid support panel or something like that is needed, then it's applied on the verso behind the piece, depending on the amount of damage and the needs. And everything we do with treatment, we try to minimize what we need to do and in terms of adding, but at the same time we want to make sure that the piece is structurally sound.
Okay. So the folks that are doing the actual work, your employees, they're trained to do that? I mean, they're just not artists that you're pulling off the street. These folks, do they have to go to a certain school, or?
Yes, most of our people, we've got 8 restorers, and there is a difference between restorers and conservators. We are members of AIC. We practice the standards of practice and principles of reversibility as established by AIC. And many of the things that we're working on, and we're working on pieces for the general population, as well as some more pieces of historic significance or museum quality pieces as well. The training, there's different levels of training depending on what level and what area restorers or conservators are working in. So our folks all have varying degrees and forms of training. Many of the people that are here have been here 30 some years. We've got quite a few people that have been here 25, 30 years or more. And we've learned through experience. I think one things that we have stuck to is our pretty much our commitment to adhere to the standards of AIC and the principles of reversibility, meaning that every project we look at, we consider the impact and the effects of any of our treatments, and we want to make sure that they are reversible for in the need for any future treatments, that we haven't caused any problems or any damage in the process.
And I would bet that artists are probably the worst restorers and conservers of their work, aren't they?
Well, it is a totally different. The work is completely different than creating the piece. I mean, there are some overlaps and some similarities, but a big factor really is in materials. For example, many artists that would attempt a restoration of an oil painting would just naturally probably choose an oil paint to use for any in-painting or retouching.
Right.
We don't use oil paints. Conservators and restorers don't necessarily use the same materials that we use to create the piece because of compatibility. The fact that the new oils have not aged and hardened and set and toned and everything like the originals may have, and they're not as reversible. Again, it goes back to reversibility and the importance of being able to remove anything that we add to a piece without causing any further damage or loss.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So tubes out or paint out of the tube. If the painting's been hanging in the sun, which is kind of a no-no, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But that wouldn't match right up. And of course, the amount of pigment that was used in a really old painting is probably different than the amount of pigments that you can find in today's manufactured paints versus handmade.
And they're completely different materials.
Right, right. Oh, wow. There's a lot more to this than you think.
There is.
uh, so tell us a little bit. We kind of jumped into restoration because we've been looking at the pieces that have been being restored on the screen. So let's talk a little bit about conservation. Where should that start? When should that start? Like the minute after the painting is complete, or, you know, so tell us first about conservation, then go into how artists can help to conserve their work.
Okay. Well, again, remember, conservation involves taking steps to preserve, protect, and prolong the life of a piece. So I think first and foremost, it starts with the artist and the use of quality materials and proven techniques when creating the work. Beyond that, quite simply, and I can expand on it, involves proper display, care, handling, and storage. Those are all key factors when you talk about preserving works of art. And I think even beyond that, I think one of the most important aspects of art conservation is preservation. We talk about preventative conservation, which really doesn't require the skills of a conservator, and that type of preservation does not always entail direct intervention with the object. Preservation conservation is extremely important, and it ideally deals with potential damage by recognizing it and stopping it before it occurs. So, obviously, the better materials and better proven techniques that an artist can employ when creating the work, I think is a great first step. Obviously, artists like to experiment, and they try a lot, try a lot of different things. That poses challenges for restorers and conservators. We also need to know a little bit about an artist and their techniques and the materials they typically use before we just dive in and work on a piece by a particular artist. It's important for us to know as much as we can about how they did their work, so that our work would have minimal impact on that. I think when we talk about preventative conservation, that's pretty simple. We're talking about routine inspections and maintenance of artwork. Efforts should be made to control climate and light exposure in any kind of display or storage areas. When we're talking about an institution or a gallery or other thing, I think it's important to educate staff and oneself about preserving and preventative handling. You want to prevent damage. It's important to do condition reports and have good written and photographic documentation of pieces to be able to use that as reference to look back to see if there's been any change in the condition or surface of a piece. It's also important to understand the sensitivities of that particular work. Again, it goes back to knowing and understanding how the artist created the piece and some of the materials that were used to create it, and then understanding how those materials age over time. I think the more emphasis that's placed on maintaining and storage, proper storage of a collection, will go a long way toward preserving it. When we talk about some of that, I think it's important to talk about UV light. I think, obviously light has an impact on art in many different ways, and there are things that we can do to minimize that. Some of the best solutions for UV protection are relatively, they're very accessible and they're relatively cheap. You can use UV absorbing plexiglass over the surface of some works. That's considered to be sort of an interior glazing. Some people use the UV protective films on windows, which can be effective. When areas where you've got fluorescent lighting, for example, it's important to use UV protective filtering sleeves. over those lights so that it can minimize the effects of UV light. We've seen people that works on paper that have come in that simply sat in a studio that had fluorescent lighting where they laid on a table for a period of months, and you can clear and they might have had another little piece of paper or a mat or something that laid over a portion of the support system for that, and you can clearly see the fading that occurred even over a period of just a few months as a result of being exposed to UV light on a daily basis. It's important to control humidity, relative humidity. And I think more so than anything, it's the changes in the humidity levels that can cause problems with sensitive works of art. I think an ideal environment would be one that is comfortable to us. Maybe temperatures in the 68 to 70 degrees, and a relative humidity level of around 50-55%. But more so than the level, it's important to maintain a consistent level. It's those changes that cause fluctuations and slight movements in some of these organic materials that ultimately lead to problems.
That's like a wine cellar. I mean, it's like wine. If you want to compare it to something else that's
it can
really
be,
nice.
Yeah. I think these are, right. And then, that's affected by taste. This is a visual thing.
But I mean, the climate-controlled cellars, and if you talk to the winemaker, this couple degrees here and there, and and a couple percents of humidity makes all the difference in a wine as it ages.
Right.
And it's the same thing, the same principle. Like you said, taste versus vision, but
right.
There are damages that occur.
Right, and it's mostly that change that causes, for example, if you've got a painting, a canvas, for example, if it's in an environment that all of a sudden has an increased humidity level, those canvas fibers are going to have a tendency to absorb that moisture. And then when the humidity level changes and it dries out, obviously there's going to be some shrinkage that occurs. I mean, it's ever so slight, but over time that can cause changes in the structure as well as the visual appearance of a piece of art. I think, again, and when we talk about humidity and storage, I think consideration really needs to be given to where we store art. You want to avoid the proximity to ventilation systems, inlets, outlets, and ductwork. It's not a good idea to store artwork in a basement or an attic. But even we've seen cases where they were not stored in there, in those areas, and they were stored on a main level of a building that had metal ductwork that was not insulated. And in the summertime, when there's a lot of humidity, that ductwork can sweat and it cause dripping and a lot of moisture to develop around those ducts that can eventually drip and drop onto any artwork that might be stored below.
Right.
We want to avoid direct sunlight, UV light. It's important to place acid-free backing boards on canvas paintings, not only to act as buffers for humidity changes, but it also protects the verso or the back from mishandling. And just, a lot of this is really just common sense. I mean, when you really think about it, it's not that difficult to do, but it does take a little bit of consideration and some forethought to prevent some of these damages. I think also one point when you're going to move a piece of art, it's important to think ahead, to kind of plan the path to make sure that it's clear that there aren't obstacles in the way and that you have a safe place to set it down in the process of moving it from one place to another. Because we see a lot of cases that are damaged as a result of just simple mistakes when handling pieces.
Yeah. I was going to say, so for the collectors that are out there, naturally it's probably going to be a lot more reasonable price-wise if I have some kind of conservation plan set up. Like, should the collectors bring their paintings into you every so often so that you can prevent a big restoration thing happening, or Is there something like that that can be done?
Well, again, every time you move a piece of art, you risk loss or damage.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So when you talk about a collection, I think I do think one of the things that we advise all collectors, and that's assuming people that have more than one or two pieces, that they develop a relationship with a conservator or restorer that they trust, that is qualified and experienced, to be able to really go in on a regular basis. That might be it could be done annually, maybe every 2 or 3 years, definitely every 5 years, to really just do an inspection of a collection to look for any changes, any issues, any problems that may occur. There are things that happen over time. Even something as simple as the hanging hardware can deteriorate over time. Almost weekly, we have a painting or a frame or a mirror or something that has come in that has fallen off the wall because the hanging hardware just simply snapped and broke. The wires that have been used for many, many years on the back of frames to attach frame pieces to the wall do deteriorate over time. The little screw eye pieces of hardware that were used to hang those wires that simply just screwed into the back of the frame. I can't tell you how often I look at a painting and I just inherently look to the back and reach down and touch those little screw eyes, and they're ready to just fall out. You can wiggle them, and you can literally just pull them right out of the back. So it's a matter of time. Many of them are just accidents waiting to happen.
Right.
And it's not always age. I mean, when we hung the OPA show, we had several pieces that were shipped to us by artists that had inadequate hanging hardware on it, that was nowhere near the size and support that was needed to adequately to support a piece of that weight. And before we hang an exhibition, we now know we have to change some of those. We actually did have one that fell right off the wall.
Oh my gosh.
As a result of that. So fortunately there was no damage, but it just shows how quickly it can happen, even in a very controlled environment.
Right.
So the using the best materials goes beyond canvas, paint, varnish. It does. I mean, it goes. It's all the way through, including the hanging hardware that is used to put the piece on the wall.
Yes. So real quickly, the photo that's up right now, Doug, I'm assuming that you're vacuuming off possible dirt before you start doing whatever you're going to do to there, or?
That's a early photographic image that was hand colored. These are typically convex shape. We restore a lot of these, and this one happened to have been exposed to water, and it had quite a bit of mold on the surface. What we're doing there is using a HEPA-vac with a miniature brush and tool, and they're able to control on the fingertip. We're able to control the amount of suction to just remove the mold that was on the surface before we then treat it. And then those areas will be cleaned a little bit further, and then any preparations done to the surface, and then we can do in-painting that might be needed to restore it. In some of these cases, oftentimes with these convex-shaped photos, families choose to help to work on the originals to preserve them as best we can, as opposed to a digital reproduction, which will be flat and it won't have that same convex shape. Even though we do quite often just simply digitally reproduce these.
Okay. And I just wanted to say to the folks that are listening live, if you have any questions, be sure to type them in for Sarah to ask for Doug. We've got about 20 minutes before we're going to get into a question and answer session if there are some questions, and if there are not, then I'll just continue on asking you questions, Doug.
Okay.
So is there anything that I haven't touched on in conservation that you'd like to add? Is this the photo that's in front of us, would that be considered a conservation piece, or?
No, I would say this piece is more restoration, because
restoration?
we just simply cleaned and removed or reduced the discolored varnish that was on the surface.
Varnish.
traditional varnishes, that traditional Damar and mastic varnishes, have a tendency to yellow and discolor with age. Some of the newer varnishes have UV inhibitors in them that minimize that or prevent that. So probably one of the more typical things that we're asked to do is simply clean a painting, and that involves oftentimes removing any superficial dirt and grime or smoke film, in addition to reducing the discolor or removing the discolored varnish, and then we reapply a new varnish, which, as you know, brings up another whole topic of discussion about varnishing.
Right. Which is, why don't we go ahead and get into some of that, since this is right in front of us now. Artists should varnish their work, I assume, is what you would say, so that there is some kind of protection level there, or layer there. When should an artist varnish, and what should an artist use to varnish?
Okay. Well, I guess first and foremost, that's really at the discretion of the artist, depending on what the end result is that they're looking to achieve. To keep in mind that varnish plays a dual role. It does have an effect on the final appearance of a painting, but it also serves as a protective coating for the paint surface. Varnishes help to intensify the appearance of the pigments of a painting surface, by the refraction of light. That we refer to that as saturation, as you may know. I think varnishes are basically they're solutions of natural synthetic resins, that are mixed with organic solvents, and as they dry, when they're spread thinly over the surface of the painting. The hope is, and most of these varnishes, when they're dried, are relatively transparent when they're applied, but over time they can change. You can get a cracking appearance on a varnish layer as you can with a paint layer over time. And it goes back to the artist making a decision really of what they want the end result to be. And there's some artists that don't want their paintings varnished. I think traditionally or historically, with oil paints, you really needed to varnish it to even everything out, the color, and to intensify the colors and then to protect them. There's a wide variety of varnish materials, and that variety is really it's as diverse as the choices of paint media and techniques that artists have used historically to paint paintings. I think the variety of materials have developed over the years, and I think it's gone from all sorts of natural resins to more synthetics that are used today. But then again, it goes back to the artist's choice. There are a lot of artists who paint in acrylics that prefer not to varnish the paintings. I think some of the synthetic varnishes that have been developed, while they're popular, they have different properties than the natural varnishes have or had. Again, natural varnish has had a tendency to darken and discolor with time, and that necessitates the removal and replacement at some point, in the history of that painting. Whereas on acrylic paintings, that's not as easily accomplished. So I get, the question of whether to varnish or not, again, I think oftentimes that's a decision that the artist needs to make.
It's interesting because when I was using Winsor Newton, let's say, paints, or sometimes even Gamblins, and these were just paints that I used when I first was starting out. Sometimes, like when I'm out painting plein air, I'll use Winton or something like that. And when I paint plein air, I bring it back to my studio to paint. I typically don't show or even use my plein air stuff without a studio session in between them. And that's me. Other folks don't do that, and that's fine. But one of the things that I always thought that I needed to do was exactly that, varnish those particular paintings, because I felt it brought out more of the pigment color. And then I switched to Michael Harding's handmade oil paints that have a really high pigment value in them. They don't have the fillers, they don't have the well, they have a little bit of wax that may stabilize it. But a lot of the synthetic things that are in some of the paints aren't in my handmade paints that Michael makes. And the color difference, I really see a color difference in there. So when I'm using Michael's paints, I don't feel a need to varnish as much as I do when I use other paints to bring out that color. So is there any harm in not varnishing a painting, an oil painting?
Well, again, I think it depends on all the combination with the quality and the type and the combination of materials that have been used up to that point, if that makes sense. I mean, just basically what you described. I mean, you're using combination of different materials that you found to ultimately achieve the end result that you want.
Right.
I think you know, the varnish does protect the paint. It helps create a barrier. You have problems with you know, paintings, for example, without a varnish layer have a tendency to collect grime or dirt, you know, sort of in the lower portions of the paint, which can rarely be removed without damage to the paint layer. You know, it makes it much more difficult to clean a painting that's unvarnished. You know, you don't have that sort of isolating layer, that barrier layer, to help facilitate cleaning before you're actually working right on the paint surface itself.
Would it be smart for the artist to go to the manufacturers that they're using and ask the question, what varnish works well with their paints?
Yeah, it's interesting, and when we look at a lot of those, and you know, you go to 10 different manufacturers, and you're going to get 8 or 9 different answers.
Right. That's why I'm
obviously
wondering.
they're promoting their own products, but I think
exactly.
You know, there's a lot of good information out there. I mean, they really do. I mean, you know, you look at some of these manufacturers, and they truly are making an effort to you know, to do some, you know, good and factual testing and comparisons and put information out there. The thing is, though, with some of the new materials, you know, there's a lot that we don't know, and time will tell. I mean, when you look at the traditional materials, you know, time has pretty much shown us what they're going to do, how they're going to age, how they're going to change, and we've learned a lot about what we need to do to deal with any issues that occur.
Right.
Some of the new materials, there's been, you know, some of it is proven, some of it is not over time. So.
Right. But one of the things that, you know, we're always told when we start painting is, you know, even if you think that no one is ever going to be interested in that painting, there's a family that you're a part of that probably will be interested in having that painting around, especially as it gets handed down from generation to generation to generation, and they really do become heirlooms.
Right.
So, you know, one thing that, you know, I guess we need to do is, you know, urge any artist, even if you're a hobbyist, you know, to really think about the materials that you're using, and if you have questions, do ask them of the manufacturer. You know, and if they have any questions, I guess, you know, they could even come in and talk with your staff or send you emails or something if they have questions. I don't know. You're not going to be in a position to really recommend any particular type of products.
Well, it's hard for us to do. I mean, just like, you know, it's hard to recommend a treatment without a thorough examination and considering a lot of different factors. I mean, we get calls all the time from people who call and say, you know, I've got a painting that's dirty. What do I do? You know, or how do I want to do this myself? Well, we first need to educate them on the need to, you know, that they really should consider not doing it themselves, you know, and because, you know, there are so many variables and so many things that can go wrong, and oftentimes, you know, amateur attempts, you know, cause problems that are not reversible, and it causes permanent damage to the piece. So, but really looking at in terms of artists, in terms of you know, again, a lot of it goes back to, you know, really thinking it through and coming up with an overall plan of how they want to approach their work, you know, and using more proven materials and techniques that really we have stood the test of time.
It really is two different sciences, really. I mean, there's the creation, where the artist creates it. And I've had a number of people being an artist come up to me and say, hey, I have this painting hanging in my house. Can you restore it? And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
It's like I don't even want to touch it, But now I know who to send them to, naturally. But it's it is interesting because I think a lot of people that aren't artists, that possibly are collectors, think that they can take it to an artist and that an artist would know how to restore it or conserve it, and that's just not true. Yeah, it's just not true.
Right.
It's, I mean, as I'm listening to you talk, it's just two different sciences totally.
Well, and unfortunately, and oftentimes we find out about that after the fact, and then we not only need to deal with the original problem that caused them to want to seek someone to restore it in the first place, we have to deal with trying to reverse what the artist may have done using non-reversible or destructive materials and methods. Yeah. So the problem is compounded and ultimately requires more time, more forethought, and more cost than it would have had the right person been looking at it to begin with.
Yeah, I say this jokingly. If you want it painted over, you never want to see that painting again. Take it to the artist. We'll paint it over.
Well,
we'll paint something over it. But
that brings up another issue too, and with respect to the gallery and the resale of a painting.
Well, yeah.
For example, George Ennis was a painter who was known for going back in and reworking paintings, and it really poses a challenge sometimes for restorers and conservators when looking at a piece to determine what part of that work was done by the artist's hand versus someone else over time. And someone may have a piece that they think, well, it's a more a contemporary piece by a living artist that sustained some damage, and I'll just take it back to that artist to rework it or to restore this damage, and therefore it also restores the integrity and maintains the value of the piece. When we're dealing with 18th, 19th, 20th century, early 20th century paintings, where the artists are no longer living, we don't have that option. And it all does pose some challenges to try to determine what's original and what's not, and what should be saved or removed and redone, and what's not. So, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does when you take yourself out of when an artist, takes yourself out of the equation. Like I said, I never even thought that I would be able to restore anything, but like I said, listening to you has been very insightful because it just tells me that was the right decision, that I shouldn't even be trying to restore or conserve, other than using the quality materials and giving it a good head start so that it can survive a long time.
Right.
That's basically the decision, I think, for an artist.
Well, that's also not to say, though, for example, if an artist finishes a painting, a painting, for example, that they've done in the last year or so, and they the painting is in a collection, or someone buys the painting, and maybe they've got a little bit of frame rub or something that something minor that's occurred as a result of whatever, mishandling or shipping or whatever. And it's not to say that an artist can't go back in, and they've got and it's a fairly minor problem, and go back and use the same materials, but then again they're retouching on top of what hopefully is a final protective varnish that was applied. But if oil paintings shouldn't be varnished until 6 months to a year after they're finished anyway, and if something happens in that time before that final protective varnish is on, there's really no reason why an artist couldn't go in and do a little bit of minor touch up and then ultimately put a final protective varnish over that. So there are some instances when I think it's perfectly acceptable, and there's no reason why that can't be done.
Right.
But again, it's an individual thing, and it depends on the problem, the circumstances, and the artist's ability to go in and do that properly.
Okay. So we kind of jumped ahead into the varnish area, because that's always a question as a teacher I always get as well, and I always tell them 6 months to a year after, then you can apply a varnish. And then the next question always is, well, what type of varnish? And so it depends on what you're trying to do.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of answers
to
that question, right?
Right, which we're not going to go into because it's a totally different, different discussion. But I want to go back and make sure that we touched on all of the things you wanted to say about restoration and conservation before we start getting into some of the artist questions that I have that I know I want to ask, and maybe some of the other ones that are out there as well. So anything else that you want to cover on restoration?
I think we've pretty much covered that, and I guess.
And it is amazing looking at the before and after pictures of the work that's in front of you. It's like a whole new painting. It looks freshly painted. It's just, it ends up being gorgeous. So, again, I guess you can say. So, I want to talk a little bit about one of the things that I get asked all the time as a teacher is, are you under attack?
No. Sorry, I thought that phone was off.
So, anyways, they'll begin. My students will start a painting, and they'll use, it's like one person told me they shouldn't use graphite pencil underneath the paint because it'll eat away at the linen, and different things like that. So, starting a painting, some folks may use turpentine to start it. Do any of those, like graphite pencil or turpentine or paint thinner, does any of that adversely affect the aging process?
It can. Again, it depends on the way which it's used, the application, and then again what it's subjected to after it's been applied, and sometimes that can be right after it's been applied as opposed to many years afterward. You talked about plein air painting. I mean, that from a conservation standpoint, that can change a piece. You've got a piece that's out in the hot, direct sunlight and sits there, for an 8-hour period, while it's being worked on. Those are all factors because those paints dried a little quicker than they may have when they were in a studio. When was the canvas prepped? There are so many factors relative to materials and techniques that all have an impact on the aging process of an individual piece, but it is an individual thing, if that makes sense, and it depends on all those things, including what it's subjected to while it's being created, after, and then much longer term. So all those things should be considered.
Right. So basically, I think one of the things that I'm hearing, Doug, is in our last show, this is February, so in January, I have to remind myself what month it is, but in January we had a conversation with a writer, and one of the challenges is a year challenge that we issued about writing, that artists should keep journals, and even if you're never going to publish those journals, the best thing that would help you is an artist journal that says, hey, I worked on this painting today and this is how I did it.
I agree.
Okay, so there you go, artists. Another reason for you to keep a journal and to start journaling is so that you can help restore your paintings in the future and also conserve them as well. So writing is an artist's best friend, basically, and the restorer's best friend as well. So.
Well, it provides them a documentation to be able to refer back to when they're trying to identify a problem or help determine what may or may not have caused a problem in their particular works. If you start to see a trend where a particular artist, there are many artists that we see that we use some of the deteriorating factors of their work to help identify their works. I mean, there are certain artists that if we don't see the typical cracking or something that you would see, that it was a direct result of the way in which they prepped their paintings or they didn't prep them before they, there are, again, all those things are oftentimes used to help identify certain works by certain artists.
Yeah, there's I guess a large controversy or huge controversy out there right now around whether certain paintings are Rembrandts and whether they're not Rembrandts. So that particular knowing or being able to determine on ones that we know were Rembrandt's, how he worked, then looking at the other paintings that are in question, you as somebody that would know how to, I guess the question is, have you ever been involved in a process where you've gone through to identify another artist's work?
Well, I think we don't do much in the way of authentication unless it's an artist that we've got a lot of experience. But I think, again, there are so many variables, and there's much more science involved in restoration and conservation than one might be aware of. And we've got tools and techniques to be able to really see beneath the surface, and there's accelerated age testing. There's all sorts of things that can be done, and paint analysis that can be done to help. And there are many people that are that spend a lot of time and do a lot of research on these issues.
Right. Right. So let's spend some time talking to the collectors out there that are listening. What should a collector be looking at? Like, if they come into your gallery, naturally you have a lot of fine art there, so it's beautiful, and hopefully they don't have too many questions. But what are the typical questions that they should be asking as they walk into a gallery and they're going to start their collection and things like that? What kind of advice can you give them?
Well, I think, obviously, the concept of buying art can be very intimidating to a lot of people. People feel that they don't know what they need to know about art or what they want in order to buy it. I'm always surprised at the number of people that come in and, they really have no idea. They know they love it, but they really are interested, and they're hungry for advice and direction, and they want to be educated on what to look for. And I think most art galleries and dealers and people who are involved in the arts are eager to share that information. We kind of have, some tips that we typically give people. We first suggest that they buy art because they like it and because it moves you. Don't rush to buy a work of art. Take your time to study the work and do your research. Be sure that it's something that you will want and you'll enjoy, and it will enhance your life in some way. And you do that by visiting as many art galleries as you can. Like I said, most gallery owners and staff are very eager and willing to help educate with respect to the art and artists that they represent. People shouldn't be shy about asking questions, and most gallery owners are very willing to answer those questions and do all that they can to give people a better understanding and help them develop their interest and steer them in an area where that may interest them. You want to get on gallery mailing lists so that you're invited to exhibition openings and special events. Those events are very educational, more so than just entertaining. A lot of people go for the art parties, but there's also a lot of people go to learn what they can about what's being exhibited. You want to visit or join as your local art museum and other nonprofit art centers. Curators often give lectures on collecting and caring for art. Attend auctions and estate sales as sort of a practice run without the intention of really buying anything if you've never been to one. Go and observe and see how it's run and try to learn the ropes before you actually dive in and make purchases. You can attend national and international art fairs and art expositions whenever you can. I guess if you know other art collectors or other people that are collecting and buying, you want to talk to them to find out what they know and what they've learned over the years, and with their own collections. Ask them to tell you about some of the mistakes they've made, and really what drives them to collect. Read as many books on art history and books on collecting as you can. Subscribe to some of the art magazines. I mean, there are really some great publications that I think constantly provide us with information. Publications like American Art Review, Fine Art Connoisseur, there's the Main Antique Digest, and a lot of auction houses. You learn a lot just by subscribing to their auction catalogs or looking at the online sales and read about the artists that they may have works represented in a particular sale. We don't see as many anymore. Some of the reviews by local and national art critics they don't give a lot of information. So, but I really think the key factor there for us is to encourage people to really buy what they love. Painting has to speak to you.
Right.
We've never really found a way or care to find a way to push anyone to buy a piece of art. The painting really has to speak to them, and all we can do is present it properly and educate them as much as we can about the artist and the piece itself, and ultimately the piece really sells itself. So.
Right. And it's interesting. I guess the question that I have too is there seems to be a over the last maybe 10 to 15 years, maybe there was this shift in the art world. You had the pop art, which was driving a lot of things like Andy Warhol and things like that. And now through all of the interviews that I've done, there's on both coasts, on the East Coast and the West Coast, there's this push to get back into more representational art.
There is.
From Baroque all the way up to Impressionism. It's just, it amazes me. And it's such an honor to do this show because I do get to meet so many artists that aren't just painting. I'm more impressionistic in the representational world, but I know some folks that are doing some classical realism. I've interviewed people that have done classical realism. I've interviewed people that are out in the impressionist plein air, and it's just amazing to me that that movement is coming back, and I think it's well overdue, but that's my own.
And we're seeing a lot more interest in figure art, and I think that really pushes an artist to their limits, to to really do the best that they can, and it really challenges them to continue to develop themselves artistically. I think we're seeing a lot more interest in traditional art.
And it's really interesting, too, because I have a lot of connections to some folks that are over in Europe. And it's the first time that I've actually heard some of my European friends actually are jealous of the fact that this movement on both coasts and moving inward into the country is occurring, because it's occurring here. It's not really occurring in Europe yet. And they're trying to take our lead finally and try to do that. Yeah, it was an interesting conversation. Yeah, I had actually interviewed Roger Scruton, who doesn't like pop art. We'll just put it that way.
Yeah.
It was an interesting conversation that I had with him last year out at the Representational Art Conference, because one of the conversations that he had, he was talking about how that conference was just something that he didn't think would be accepted yet in Europe, but yet here in the United States, there's this major push for representational art to kind of take the front stage again, and I think it's very, very hard for collectors, and it goes back to that statement that you made about you have to purchase what you like and don't worry about the trend, because you're the one that's going to be looking at it on the wall, on your wall.
Right.
And don't let someone else tell you what it is you like and don't like, because it's a cycle, of what is out there. And the other conversation that I've had with a number of artists is, art is becoming very much a commodity. And if it isn't already a commodity, it's going to be a commodity. So there's a lot of interesting conversations that have happened, and collecting is it can be confusing, because there's a lot of conversations that are occurring out there that are conflicting. So again, I really like the advice of you have to like it. It has to speak to you. It has, if you want it hanging on your wall, the last thing you do, you don't want to purchase something that you're going to walk by a year from now and go, oh, why did I buy that?
Right, and feel something negative toward that piece. So.
Right. Of course, there's always the resale part of that equation that goes in there as well. But
well, there are collectors who buy for investment, which we don't recommend. I mean, that can be good, and it oftentimes is good. But again, it goes back to buying what you love.
Exactly. So, is there any advice? Should collectors? Do you ask collectors to talk with the artist directly, or if they have any questions? Or
when we're talking about collectors who are interested in collecting or buying pieces by living artists, yes, I think, which leads into another discussion about relationships with galleries,
yes.
because we want to be protective of our relationships with our clients as well. But I think if we work with artists who respect those relationships, absolutely, I think direct connection between the artist and the collector is critical. We've seen that play out recently in some of the exhibitions that we've had that have been tremendously successful, and I think due in a large part to the fact that the artists were here interacting with the collectors and with the buyers, and they had and the buyers had an opportunity to really get to know the artist and have a better understanding of the work and the artists and their lives and their history, and I think it's, when people buy a work by a living artist, they're buying the artist as much as they are the piece.
Right.
They're buying into the artist, and and they want to know all that they can about that person.
And as an artist, I welcome any emails or conversations that I can have with you around art in general, or my art, or other people's art. But it's I go out and I demo, and it was interesting because I was demoing at a First Friday event up here in, where I live, and I was painting away, and then like a week later, all these people kept coming up to me going, "Oh, I saw you painting at First Friday. I was going to interrupt you, but I didn't." And here I didn't think anybody came because nobody was talking to me.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I'm like, why didn't you stop me? It's like, that's why I was there. So I got to quit having this really serious look on my face, like, don't disturb me or something, I guess, when I'm painting. But no, it's like the artists really, really do like to have conversation with people who want to learn about their art or any art. It's one way that we can help educate. It's one way that we can start to helpfully make the collector feel more comfortable about their purchases and their likes and I have talked to a number of people who wanted to talk to me about a particular type of art that I don't particularly like, but it's not my choice. It's their likes, and we have conversations about that, and they're positive conversations. I don't try to sway them away from what they like, but point out things to them that will help them see some of the things that I see.
I think that's important so that they have a better understanding of the work.
Absolutely. So I'm going to check here with Sarah. Do we have any questions coming in, Sarah?
Hey, we have one so far from Richard.
Okay.
And Richard asks, what can you tell us about the materials used by early painters? And then he wrote mummy brown.
Mummy brown?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So what can you tell us about the materials used by the early painters?
Well, again, I think they go back to materials that were more natural in state, and I think that's a very long conversation. We can talk for days on that. I think it gets back to traditional paintings and materials that were used, and we talked a lot about that in our discussion about how some of those materials differ from what's being manufactured and oftentimes used today. Mm-hmm. And again, the materials goes from the artist materials to the support systems to whatever they're painting on and what they're painting. I think, like for example, many traditional artists had a tendency to really use a lot of priming and gesso on their canvases, and they really went to a lot of effort to visually remove the canvas texture. And they would build the gesso up and sand it down and build it up and sand it down to prep the canvas so that it was almost a perfectly smooth surface to paint on, and they would hide the canvas texture. Whereas now, I think some of the artists now have they're not concerned with that, and I think there's a tendency to want to show that texture. and build off of that with heavy paints and different things. So, I'm not so sure I can answer that question in the context of this conversation because it's so vast and goes into many different areas.
Yeah, it's again, it goes back to that. It's a different science when you're painting. It's really not Doug's job to tell artists today what they should be painting on as much as it's Doug's job to turn around and make sure that he knows how to fix it.
What to do about it, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
when it doesn't work or when there's a problem that arises.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting from that standpoint. Like I said, that was the big aha for me today. Is like, I could sit here and ask you, a number of different material questions, but in the long run, you're not that focused on what the materials are today from the standpoint of what should be used. It's from the standpoint of how it should be fixed.
And we're looking at each piece individually as it's in front of us to try and determine what materials were used, what's the problem, and what do we need to do to correct that problem.
And to me, it also comes down to a lot of the answers that I get from a number of different master artists that I interview, like Carolyn Anderson. I can't remember what we named the show, but it was basically, it had to do with learning the rules so that you could break the rules type of thing. And I asked her the first question, and she comes back and said the answer to the question is that there are no rules. And I was like, well, okay, Carolyn, thanks. That was a nice, 60 seconds.
Right.
What are we going to talk about for the next, 90? So,
well, unfortunately, in this particular case, I'm faced with a similar answer. So.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it comes back to one of the questions that I was going to ask. Back when Claude Monet and the rest of them were painting, their use of medium, the type of medium that they would use, linseed oil or walnut or something like that, that happened a lot. They did use a lot of mediums, and through the years, paint manufacturing has gotten so much better. I've heard from a number of artists, masters, and just folks that I paint with all the time, and basically when you said you use a medium, it's really up to the artist and what they're trying to achieve with that oil paint, because maybe the brand that they're using isn't as liquidy or viscous. Maybe it's very thick, maybe it's not. So if it's very thick and they want it to be thinner, they'll use a medium to thin that out so that they can paint more wet, into wet. Where somebody like myself, I don't particularly like mediums. It depends on the paint I'm using whether or not I'll use a medium, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Right. Yeah, I think choosing the appropriate painting medium is really, it's an essential part of making the painting your own.
Right.
It allows the artist needs to experiment to find what medium fits their needs for the particular piece they're working on. Find one that allows you to really get into the flow of the painting and really to accomplish what you want. I think it is about, that's part of making the painting your own.
Right. And then, so to take that one step further, all Doug needs to know is, did you use medium on that painting? And if you did, what did you use? And what the support was behind it. And he might, and then what your technique is. And if you put that in your journal, Doug's all ready to fix your painting.
It's that simple. You're right.
Well, I don't know if it's that simple, Doug, but it makes it a little bit easier for you, right? So, Sarah, anything else or coming in?
We don't have any in the questions queue, so I just wanted to remind everyone, if they do have a question, they can type it into the questions section of the Gotowebinar control panel. I have a question, actually. I'm kind of wondering, Doug, if you have like a favorite piece that you've restored, or a most difficult piece.
I have to say, the first piece that comes to mind is probably one of the pieces we had the most fun with over the years. We have done pieces for the White House. We've done some pieces that had a lot of historic significance. And there was one piece years ago that was a traveling exhibition of paintings of Elvis Presley, and we had a call that there was one that was suffered some damage moving it from one exhibition to another, and we were really surprised when we got it that it was a full-length nude portrait of Elvis Presley that we had some fun with in the studio. It was a pretty shocking painting, just the way that it was done. But I think really when I look at one of the most important pieces that we've done over time was some of the more sentimental pieces. I will never forget the day that I happened to be in the office on a Saturday when a client picked up a restoration that we had just done on a small plaster disc that her daughter had impressed her hand in when she was 4 years old. She shared with me that when she brought it in that her daughter had passed away at a young age, and this was a piece that she treasured. It had no monetary or market value at all, purely sentimental. And I happened to be here, fortunately, the morning when she picked it up, and I can tell you that's one of the best hugs that I've ever had. And that piece, out of all the things that we've done, really sticks in my mind as probably one of the more important pieces that we've done. So
there's a perfect example of heirloom type of thing. It just means it's priceless. It just means
probably half the things that we restore, our clients choose to restore them based on the sentimental value as opposed to the market value. And we do a lot with photographs. I mean, family photographs, for the most part, unless they're historically significant for one reason or another, don't have a lot of monetary value. It's purely sentimental. And we have people that will invest as much to restore family photos as another collector may into a more valuable painting. So it's, you never know.
Yeah. So tell us what's coming up at Eisele. Any exhibits or shows?
We've got we're working on a few things, and I'm going to find my cheat sheet here. Let's see. I mean, we don't have any definite dates for things yet. We're working on all that. We've got our seasonal spring-summer exhibition that's going to feature paintings by living artists as well as artists of the past. We're going to be showing seascapes, for example, some Michigan, Maine, and from the East Coast paintings, florals and still lifes, and more landscapes that are depictive of the season, some more field and stream paintings. We're trying to iron out whether it's going to be in June or November, the Stobart Ruthven Show.
Nice.
We're working with, last year we had an event that worked with the USO and benefited Walter Reed Medical Hospital in D.C. We partnered with John Stobart and the USO to create, Stobart created a piece that we ultimately sold to benefit the wounded vets at Walter Reed. So
nice.
It was a great success. I had the honor of spending the day with President George H.W. Bush, 41, at his home in Kennebunkport last summer. Stobart and I went and visited with him along with some other members of the USO. President Bush agreed to co-sign the painting to help move our efforts forward, and that painting did sell for a record $1 million.
Wow.
We actually we have the painting here in the gallery, and it's soon to be sent off to its new owner. We're repeating that project with Cincinnati's John Ruffin, wildlife artist, is doing a piece that will hopefully be signed by multiple presidents to create sort of a similar fundraiser. So
cool.
The only other thing we've got is, at this point, along with a few other our normal exhibitions, is the Cincinnati Art Club's Viewpoint Show that will be hosted here in our gallery in the fall.
Okay, great. Sounds wonderful. So, Sarah, just anything else coming on your end? I see you just put up the thank you for joining us sign, so I'll let you take it.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind everyone that they can use the coupon code ARTCHATS10 at northlightshop.com. You can just type that into, you'll see a little field there when you go to checkout. And also, I wanted to let you guys know, if you visit artistnetworkuniversity.com, you can find online art courses that are taught by your host here, Linda Fisler. And finally, Linda, would you like to tell them a little bit about your next art chat?
Yes, the next one, I've actually, this is one of those things where you say to yourself, what's the worst thing that somebody could say to you? And the answer is probably no. So I contacted the art biz coach. She has been around teaching art marketing since I can remember, at least back since 2002. I think I ran across her when she was just starting out, and I've actually kind of just looked at her stuff, and I've never really been in touch with her or anything like that. But I sent Allison an email and asked her if she'd like to be on the program, and she wrote me back and said that she'd love to be on the program. She's a very sweet lady, very nice. She has marketing boot camps for artists. She's very, very well known. A lot of artists know about her, and if you don't know about her, you should know about her. She'll be joining us. We're going to be talking about marketing your art with Allison, and she's going to have some great organizational tips and different things like that that I think will come in handy. Besides being an art marketer, she's also an art coach. I mean, she is like if you think about a life coach, she is very much like that. So it'll be interesting to talk with Allison. She'll be very, I guess you say, forthcoming, I guess, with a lot of advice, and she's putting her presentation together, which I need to talk with you about, Sarah. But so we'll have some great slides that you'll be able to see with a lot of great advice on it with Allison, and that'll be on March 18th at 1 o'clock.
Awesome. Well, that sounds good. I look forward to that. Well, thank you guys so much for being here today. I learned a lot. This was great, Doug, and thank you so much, Linda, again for doing this.
Yes, and
I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, thanks everyone out there who was listening, and just a reminder, we were recording today's session, so if you joined us late, you can find the recording at artistnetwork.com/art-chats, and you'll also be getting an email from Gotowebinar that will have that link in it as well, so keep an eye out for that.
Right.
All right, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. I'm sorry?
Yep, I was just going to say goodbye to everybody and thank them for tuning in, either live or on demand. We're always glad you're here.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.